The studio did not look like television. No sweeping crane shots or echoing stages, no glittering audience waiting for cues. Joe Rogan walked in first, coffee in hand, nodding to the crew. He took his seat, swung the mic closer, and rolled his shoulders. He lived in rooms like this. The routine was a kind of armor. Joe Rogan walked in first, coffee in hand, nodding to the crew with an easy familiarity that comes from repetition. He checked the levels on the board out of habit, even though the team did that already. He took his seat, swung the mic closer, and rolled his shoulders. He lived in rooms like this. The routine was a kind of armor. Through the glass, the producer signaled, "Guest is here." Prince Harry stepped through the studio door a moment later, shoulders squared, jaw set. He wore a fitted navy jacket over a plain shirt, nothing flashy but pressed and perfect. His eyes did what eyes do after years of cameras. They scanned the room, mapping exits and angles without looking like they were doing it. He shook Joe's hand firmly. "Joe, thanks for making time, Harry. Good to be here." The handshake was polite. The air under it was not. They both felt it. One man who made a career questioning everything in public. Another man who had grown up as a symbol and spent recent years trying to become a voice. Two different languages about to share a single sentence. A publicist hovered near the wall, trying to remain invisible while being ready to intervene if she had to. She gave Harry a small nod that said the same thing she had said in the car. "Stay calm, stay clear, no surprises." Jamie, the producer, checked the final settings, then leaned toward the talkback. "Levels are clean, 30 seconds to live." Joe glanced up and gave a thumbs up. Harry adjusted his headphones. He did not ask for water. He did not ask for notes. He rested one hand lightly on the table and set the other in his lap, a posture that looked simple and took effort. The red light clicked on. Joe's voice slid into the room. "Welcome to the show. Today we have a very special guest. Prince Harry is here. He has a new initiative, a lot to say, and I think this is going to be a real conversation." Harry smiled, small and careful. "Thanks for having me." The opening minutes were easy by design. Joe asked about Harry's mental health advocacy, about veterans, about what it meant to carry a uniform and then a title and then a brand. Harry answered with practiced clarity. He spoke about loss and pressure and the strange way the world folds in on itself when your face becomes public property. He did not hurry. He did not stumble. He sounded like a man who had told this story enough times to stop hating it and start owning it. Joe nodded at the right moments and followed with the right questions. He was good at this part. Let the guest settle. Let the audience lean in. Let the rhythm find itself. In the control room, Jamie watched the levels and the live chat. Comments moved too fast to read fully. Some were supportive, some were hostile, many were curious. The numbers climbed. They always did when the guest carried a title that once came with castles and crowds. At minute 10, Joe pivoted. The change was subtle, the way a fighter changes footwork before throwing a different kind of punch. "So Harry, you have talked a lot about leaving a system that did not serve you. You have also done many interviews about it. Why this one today? Why here?" Harry did not blink because long form is different. You can say a sentence without it becoming a headline, or at least that is the hope. Joe smiled. "Headlines are not my thing, talking is, so let's talk." They did. About the structure of family and institution. About what it feels like to be looked at more than listened to. About the difference between privacy and secrecy. Harry spoke about therapy with a tone that suggested gratitude rather than performance. He described waking up and choosing honesty on days when pretending would be easier. He did not sound like a victim. He sounded like a man who knew the cost of silence and had decided to pay the opposite price. Joe listened. He also watched. He watched for the tells that say a guest is guarding something. He watched the eyes and the breath. He heard the way a voice tightens when a line is near. He had a gift for finding that line and asking what lived on the other side of it. He eased toward it now. "You know this show. I ask what my audience is asking." A lot of people wonder something simple. Why keep talking about the past if the point was to get free of it? Harry did not bristle. He took a breath that reached his stomach. Because for some people silence is survival, for others speaking is, I tried one, I am trying the other. Joe nodded. Fair, but there is also the life you live now. You moved, you changed your role. You built new work. What does a good day look like now? The questions softened the room. Harry talked about his children, about coffee on the patio before emails, about his dog and the way the dog loved him without knowing anything about him. His voice found warmth. It changed his posture. It changed the space. Joe let the light in and then drew the shade again. Let me ask you about responsibility. You have a huge platform. When you talk about mental health or the structure of your old life, people listen. Do you feel responsible for the effects of your words on the people you left behind? The publicist's eyes flickered. It was a clean question with sharp edges. Harry knew it. He stayed still. I feel responsible for telling the truth as I lived it, he said, not for controlling how other people feel about hearing it. If someone is hurt by honesty, I can be sorry for the pain without being sorry for the truth. Joe held his gaze. That is a strong sentence. Some would call it convenient. Harry's jaw tightened by an inch. Convenient would have been shutting up and collecting a check for smiling. This is not that. Jamie saw the chat spike. The numbers jumped again. The moment was warming, the way air warms before a storm. Joe leaned back just enough to show ease without surrender. He changed lanes. You have talked about the press and distortion. You know this show is raw. No producers in your ear. No edits. Is that why you came? To control the context by giving it all at once. I came because I prefer conversations to monologues, Harry said. And because you have an audience that thinks for themselves, even when they disagree with you. I respect that, Joe smiled. Respect is mutual, but you know I am going to ask things that make people squirm. I assumed that was the point, Harry said. It is, Joe said, and then he let silence sit on the table between them like a third guest. Silence in a room like that is not empty. It is a tool. It reveals who needs to fill it and who can hold it. Harry did not rush to break it. He waited. Joe nodded as if they had just shaken hands without moving. Let's talk about identity, Joe said. When you remove a title that once defined you, what is left? How do you build a self that is not a reaction to what you left behind? For a second, Harry looked relieved. This was the question he wanted. He spoke about purpose that was not inherited, about work that did not require permission, about the difference between duty and meaning. He sounded hopeful. He sounded like a person who had found a small piece of ground that felt solid. Joe listened, then trimmed away the comfort. There is another identity in this room, the one people project onto you. Some see courage, some see privilege, some see hypocrisy. Which of those versions do you think is most wrong? Harry was quiet for a beat. The wrong version is the one that refuses to change after hearing the truth, he said. People can call me whatever they want. They cannot call me silent. The producer marked the line. The chat lit again. A word pulsed through it, respect. Another word pulsed through it as well, performative. The red light watched. The mics lined in. The room turned. Joe tapped the table once softly. He rarely did that. It was a tell of his own. He was interested and he was about to push. You have said you do not want to be a symbol. You keep becoming one anyway. You left a palace but you found a platform. And platforms can be palaces with different walls. Do you see the irony? Harry's smile did not reach his eyes. I see the irony. I also see the choice. A platform can be used to sell or to serve. I am trying to choose the second one more than the first. Joe nodded. Trying is an honest word. It is, Harry said. I picked it on purpose. Joe took a sip of coffee and set the mug down gently, making no sound. He looked at the clock without looking at it. There was time left in the hour. Enough to climb and enough to fall. He shifted again. Let me ask about family, not names, the shape of it. When private conversations become public content, where is the line? Who draws it? The publicist straightened. Harry did not look at her. He kept his eyes on the man across the table. The line moves, he said. It is not neat. People want neat. They will not get it here. Sometimes I will share. Sometimes I will not. The rule is simple. If saying it helps someone carry their own story, I may say it. If it only helps me hit back, I will hold it. Joe nodded, but his eyes narrowed. That sounds measured. It also sounds like it gives you cover to say whatever you want as long as you can argue it helps someone. Harry's face flushed by a shade and then returned to normal. That is a risk, he said. I take it. I also live with it. Jamie saw the comments split in real time. Half the stream praised the sentence. Half called it spin. That was the thing about truth told by famous people. It did not land on a level field. Every ear tilted its own way. Joe let the tension drift for a breath. Then he unlocked the door that would lead them toward the shape of a clash. You know I am going to ask about Megan, he said. The name changed the molecules in the room. It always did. Not because of who she was. Because of what the world had decided she was supposed to be. Harry's eyes hardened, not with anger but with preparation. He knew this was coming. He also knew he had no new answer that would make old arguments disappear. You can ask, he said. I will decide how to answer. Joe nodded. Fair. I am not here to gossip. I am here to test ideas. People say your defense of her has been absolute while your criticism of your old life has been severe. Do you see how that looks like a trade? You gave up one loyalty and replaced it with another. Harry sat still. He kept his voice low. Loyalty does not mean blindness. It means choosing where you stand when storms hit. I stood where I chose. I would again. He paused. As for criticism, telling the truth about harm is not betrayal. It is repair. It is the only way anything gets fixed. The publicist relaxed half an inch. The answer was clean, but the room was not. Joe looked down at his notepad, then back up. His voice stayed even. Some people are going to hear that as noble. Others are going to hear it as branding. Does that bother you? Harry's lips pressed together. What bothers me is living a lie to make strangers comfortable. If the price of truth is looking like a brand, fine, I will pay it. Jamie felt the show find its edge. The cliff face was ahead. The path between was narrow. Joe rolled the mic a touch closer. His voice softened the way a blade shines when a cloth passes over it. Last thing before the break. You came here to have a conversation, not a coronation. So let me ask the version of the question that fans and critics are both shouting. Are you still running from something, Harry, or finally running toward it? The air in the room pressed down. It was not a gotcha. It was better. It was a mirror. Harry did not look away. I ran for years without moving an inch, he said. Now I am walking. It looks slower. It is not. It is the only way to actually arrive anywhere worth being. The red light flicked to a dimmer pulse as they slid to break. Joe said they would be back. Harry took off his headphones and set them down carefully. He straightened his jacket as if centering it would center the gravity he felt building. In the control room, the feed cut to ads. The sound dropped. The silence that replaced it was not relief. It was gathering. The publicist stepped one pace closer. She whispered, "You are fine." Harry nodded without speaking. Joe leaned back and looked at the ceiling for a second. Then he looked at Jamie. After the break, he said, "The real part." Jamie nodded. He knew what that meant. The questions would strip away polish. The tone would sharpen, the air would heat. It always did when a guest carried myth into a room that believed in fire. Outside the building, evening thickened. Cars hissed across wet asphalt. Somewhere, a delivery driver checked his map. Somewhere, a woman adjusted the volume on her phone while stirring a pot on the stove. Somewhere, a group of friends gathered around a laptop to watch a conversation turn into a test. Inside, the red light steadied again. The countdown began. The last words Joe said before the mics went live were simple. Ready? Harry's reply was just as simple. Yes. The light lifted to full. The microphones leaned in. The safe part of the hour ended. The hour everyone would talk about began. The red light steadied again, and the sound in the room reset to that small invisible hum that always comes right before words start to matter. Joe adjusted his headphones and gave a brief nod toward the glass. Jamie lifted a hand in reply, then dropped his eyes to the board. The mix was clean. The chat was moving fast. The numbers climbed the way a storm climbs a coastline. Joe leaned into the mic with a voice that sounded casual to anyone not sitting in that room. "Welcome back. We were talking about walking instead of running. I want to follow that path for a second. Because there is something in this story that people do not understand yet. They hear you say you want privacy. Then they see you choose very public platforms. They hear you say you want peace. Then they see you step into places built for heat. Help me square that." Harry set his palms on the table, fingertips resting lightly against the wood. He did not look at his publicist. He did not look at the clock. He looked at the man across from him. "Privacy is not hiding," he said. "It is choosing. I am choosing when and how to speak. I am not asking anyone to stop speaking about me. I am asking to speak for myself." Joe kept his eyes steady. "That is a neat sentence. People will put it on a graphic and share it on their phones, but there is a second half here. Money, platforms like this are not just conversations, they are businesses. You left one kind of institution and now you are a stakeholder in another. Are you comfortable with that?" Harry did not bristle. He kept his breath slow. "I am comfortable earning my work," he said. "Not trading my name for a life I did not choose. If that looks like business, it is because it is. That is not a sin." Jamie watched the live comments tilt and sway like a field in wind. The words repeated themselves the way they always do when a topic hits a nerve. Hypocrisy, courage, brand, human, the same four corners of a room that never stays still. Joe lifted his mug and set it down without sound. The silence that followed was not an accident. He let it stretch until it almost touched the edge of discomfort, then stepped into it. "You have talked about service," he said. "Military, charity, advocacy. Those are noble words. But service has another side. The part you do not choose, the part where you answer to something bigger than yourself. Do you miss that?" Harry blinked once. The question did not sting, it pressed. "Yes," he said, "I miss the clarity of that. Orders. Objectives, standards you do not write." Then he paused. "I do not miss the parts that made a person a prop." Across the glass, Jamie wrote down the sentence. He did not know why he wrote it down. He knew the system would capture every word. Sometimes your hand writes something just to tell your head that it heard it. Joe did not soften. "You are saying the institution turned you into a prop. I want to make sure I heard you right." "I am saying some parts did," Harry replied. "And when I spoke about the parts that did, people heard it as an attack on the parts that did not. That is not what it was." The publicist shifted her weight to the other foot. She had sat through interviews that wanted a blow-up. This did not feel like that. It felt like something slower. A vice clamping by small degrees. Joe leaned back in his chair. The leather breathed under him. "When you talk about harm," he said, "you talk about it clean. Calm voice. Measured words. People admire that. People also think it sounds rehearsed. Are you rehearsed right now?" "No," Harry said, "I am practiced. There is a difference. Practice is what you do so you do not panic when it counts." A small smile flickered at Joe's mouth. He liked that answer. He liked it because it was true and because it did not move the larger question away. "So you do not panic," he said, "but do you ever regret, behind the book, behind the interviews, behind the public choice to keep telling this story, do you ever wish you had kept more back?" Harry looked at the mic arm, then past it, then back to Joe. Yes, the word was solid. Then he added, "But regret does not undo harm. Repair does. I cannot repair what I will not name." The chat spiked again. The board lights looked like a city scene from high up. Jamie had worked shows with chaos. Laughter, fights. This was not chaos. This was heat like a forge. Joe saw it too. He changed angles. "Let me ask about your father," he said. Not names, the role. A father raises a son in a structure he did not invent. A son grows up and says the structure hurt him. Where is the line between truth and loyalty? Harry did not exhale, he did not swallow. He placed his words as if laying stones across water. Loyalty is not silence, he said. Loyalty is wanting the people you love to be better, even if better means change. Then he added, and truth without love is just noise. For a moment, Joe looked down at his notes. It was not a retreat, it was a sweep of the path ahead. He chose the next stone with care, your brother then. Again, not names, a brother is a mirror. Sometimes the mirror shows us what we love, sometimes it shows what we cannot stand. Do you speak to him? Harry's eyes changed in a small way that cameras never miss. He spoke plainly, not the way we used to, he said. But a mirror is still a mirror even when the room is dark. Jamie could feel the audience trying to parse that in real time. You did not need to be a royal watcher to recognize the ache in the sentence. You only needed a sibling. Joe used the opening. If he called you after this show and said, enough, stop doing this, would you stop? No, Harry said, then he softened it without diluting it. I would listen, I would explain. I would ask him to sit with me and talk without other voices in the room. But I would not stop telling the truth because someone is uncomfortable hearing it. Joe nodded once. Then his voice went quieter, which is how voices go when they step near a place that could break or hold. Did you ever think you would be a man who needs a microphone to be believed in his own family? Harry did not speak for 3 full seconds. The quiet did not sag, it held. Then he said, no, I did not. The producer felt the room shift half a degree toward human. It would not stay there. Shows like this never allow it to linger long, but for that small space it did. Joe went at the larger shape. Here is another tension. You want to heal, you also sell stories, you say you are not performing. People say this is exactly performance. Do you see why they say it? Yes, Harry said, and he kept the word on its own line. When someone writes a book about surviving cancer, we do not call that performance. We call it sharing what might help the next person. Pain is not pure just because it is private. Joe let the comparison sit. He knew some listeners would bristle, he knew others would nod. The best questions do that. They split a room cleanly and then watch who steps where. He changed tack. Let us talk about America. You left the island. You chose a state that prints fame on the air. You say it gives you space. Does it also make the heat seem like air that you now need? Harry's mouth tugged into a quick humor that fell away almost as fast. I do not need heat, he said. I need oxygen. It is not the same thing. Joe smiled with his mouth closed. Fair, then his tone leaned harder. You have criticized tabloids. Fair, you have criticized the role of the press. Fair where it is fair. But there is a third ring now. Influence, algorithms, clips. You are not above it. You are in it right now. Do you feel the pull to say more than is wise because more always reaches more? Harry looked past the mic at the red light. It looked back at him without blinking. Every person with a voice feels that pull, he said. Wisdom is knowing when not to feed it. Then he paused. I do not always get that right. Jamie watched the chat. He saw a different word entering now. Empathy. The tide can change twice in a single minute when a conversation is honest. Joe did not let go of the other side. But you do know that sometimes you do get it wrong, he said. Say something too sharp. Share something that maybe should have stayed in a kitchen or a car. What do you do the day after? I call the person I hurt, Harry said, or I sit with the fact that I cannot call them. Then I try to do better. Trying is not a small thing. It is everything for people who were taught to pretend instead. Joe lifted his eyes to the clock, then back to the prince, then down to his notes again. He had one more set for this segment, the difficult kind. The kind of show like this exists to place in the center of a table. Let us talk about your military service, he said. People respect it. They also point to the contradictions. A protected life, then war zones, then cameras. Some say you took risks because they were finally yours to choose. Others say the risks were cushioned by a net the rest of us do not have, which is closer to the truth. Harry did not bridle, he did not sermonize. He gave an answer that would make some people angry because it refused to pick a simple lane. Both, he said, there were nets. And there were nights when the only net was the men beside me and the noise over our heads. Service is not cleaned up by privilege. It is complicated by it, Joe pressed once more, and writing about it later, you know what I am asking, did you ever put someone else at risk by telling your story? Harry's voice went even lower. I did not publish anything that would expose a person or a tactic. Then he added, if you read it and saw yourself in it, it is because we were there together, not because I named you. That line matters. The publicist watched Harry's body. Shoulders still squared, jaw set but not clenched, hands steady, the signs of a person who is carrying weight but not yet buckling. Joe shifted to the topic the audience had been typing in the comments for 15 minutes without pause. The wife, he needed to find a way to ask that did not turn the hour into a tabloid. He chose a frame that sounded like anthropology. It was still a blade. Your marriage is a symbol to anyone who wants to see what they want, he said. Some see rescue, some see rebellion, some see strategy. Strip all that away. Who are you because of her that you could not be before? Harry did not take offense. He took a beat. A partner makes you answer to who you said you wanted to be, he said. That is the gift and the grind. Without that, I might have kept playing parts other people wrote for me. Joe followed with the matching pair. And who is she because of you? Harry met his eyes. Someone who knows she is not alone in a room designed to make you feel alone. Jamie leaned back from the board. He knew what was coming next. The turn, the line that gets crossed. It always arrives dressed in polite clothes. It always takes the room a second to realize what it is. Joe looked down at a note card he had not touched yet. He could have skipped it. He did not. One more, he said, you call this truth. A lot of people call it monetized pain. You say you are helping people. A lot of people say you are teaching them to blame. Is this healing, or a very eloquent form of revenge? The room went very still. Even the air conditioner seemed to hush itself. The publicist went statue still. Jamie did not look up from the board. He did not want to see the exact frame of Harry's face when the words landed. Harry kept his eyes on Joe and did not blink. The silence took the shape of a held breath. When he spoke, his voice did not rise. It dropped. Revenge is easy, he said. You do not lose sleep over it. Healing is hard. You lose years to it. I did not spend years to settle a score. Joe did not let it go. Then why does it often sound like a score being settled? Because the truth and a grudge can sound the same to people who want quiet, Harry said. If you lived through a fire, your story will always smell like smoke to someone. Jamie heard the line and knew it would echo. He also knew it did not put the moment away. It only set the table for what would follow. Joe angled for what he thought would be the reveal, the thing that would pull the pin. If your father called tomorrow and said it is time to come home and stop all of this, would you do it? Harry shook his head. No. If the crown offered a path back, Joe said, not ceremonials, real work, would you take it? Harry's eyes hardened. No, then what is the endgame, Joe said. You cannot keep telling the same story forever. People get tired, or they turn on you. What is the end that lets you stop? Harry answered slowly. The end is when I can tell a story about my life that is not a reaction to someone else writing it first, he said. The end is when my kids know their father did not choose silence over their future. The countdown card lifted in the glass. They had seconds. Joe made one last choice before the break. It would not look like a big choice on paper. In a room like this it was. Are you proud of the man you are at this exact moment, he asked. Harry did not look away. I am not proud, he said. I am present. We will be right back, Joe said, voice even. The light fell to black. Harry eased his headphones off and let them rest on the table. He reached for the water he had ignored earlier and took one drink and set it down. The publicist moved close enough to speak without being picked up by a live mic. You are holding, she said. I know, he replied. Joe stood and stretched his shoulders, then turned toward the glass. Jamie was already looking at him. Joe lifted a finger in a small circle. Wrap this arc. Then the last segment goes to the place. Jamie understood. He put a note on the screen for Joe. Boundaries, ownership, then the difficult thing, the line. In a small kitchen across town, a woman washed a plate and listened to the replay from the living room. In a barracks 3 states away, a young veteran turned the volume up and texted a friend that they were watching a man stand under a weight they knew by another name. In a dorm room glued with posters and reminders, a student watched the chat and thought about the way truth costs more than most people can afford at scale. Back in the studio, the minutes moved like stones across water. The red light would lift again. The next step would be steeper. The floor manager pointed. 10 seconds. Joe rolled his shoulders forward and back. Harry placed both hands on the table again. Jamie took a breath he did not know he was holding. 5, 4, 3, 2. The light returned. The safe part of the climb was over. The rest of the hour waited above them like cold air and a narrow ledge. The red on air light flared again, bathing the small studio in its usual dull crimson glow. But something about the room was different now. The temperature hadn't changed, the air hadn't shifted, yet every person inside felt the tension rising like invisible smoke. The crew could feel it through the glass. Joe's producer, Jamie, whispered into his headset. Careful, we're near the edge. Joe nodded faintly without looking up. He didn't need to be told. He could feel the pulse of the conversation like a live wire under his hand. It was the rhythm every great interviewer both feared and lived for, the moment when civility starts to tremble, when truth is seconds away from turning into something raw. Joe leaned toward the mic. His voice came out smooth, calm, almost conversational, but the words carried weight. All right, we're back, he said. You've been open about the struggles, the choices, the media storms. But let's talk about something deeper. Prince Harry didn't move. His expression was unreadable. He had been in thousands of rooms like this before, rooms full of microphones and judgment, and people waiting for him to say the one sentence they could use for headlines. But this one felt different. This wasn't royal press control. This was bare, unfiltered, no safety net. Joe continued. You've said this isn't about blame, but some people say everything you've done, the interviews, the book, the series, it all feels like revenge. Dressed up as healing, what do you say to that? A ripple passed through the control room. Jamie lowered his voice. Here it comes. Harry's jaw tightened. He didn't answer right away. He took a slow breath through his nose, then leaned slightly closer to the mic. If telling the truth feels like revenge to someone, he said, it's probably because they're used to silence protecting them. Joe nodded. That's a strong answer. But let's be honest here. A lot of people think your version of the truth hurts others more than it helps anyone, that it's not really about healing, it's about winning a story war. Harry's tone stayed calm. Then those people haven't listened. Or they don't want to. The crew shifted uncomfortably. The silence that followed wasn't dead air, it was friction. Joe pressed again. I'm not talking about the tabloids, I'm talking about real people, family. The ones who can't defend themselves publicly. Do you ever think maybe you've gone too far? Harry's hand twitched slightly on the table, just enough for Jamie to notice through the glass. He had seen that movement before. The body's first sign that something inside is cracking. I've thought about it, Harry said slowly, every day, but I've also thought about the nights I didn't say anything and watched the people I love get torn apart. Silence didn't protect anyone, it just made the lies sound louder. Joe held his gaze. So you think you had no choice? Harry looked straight at him. No, he said, I think I finally made one. The words landed like a thud. Joe took a sip of water not because he was thirsty but because the air felt heavier now. That sounds noble, he said. But come on, you've sat down with Opera, Netflix, Spotify, and now me. That's not just speaking your truth. That's production, that's marketing. Do you see how it looks to people watching? Harry's jaw flexed again. I see how it looks, he said, but I also see how it feels, and those are two very different things. Joe leaned in. Feels like what? Harry's voice stayed measured, but his eyes sharpened. Like taking back control from people who spent their lives making me feel like a character in their story. If that bothers them, so be it. Jamie saw Joe nod slightly, but his eyes told another story. He wasn't done pushing. Let's talk about that character, Joe said, because right now that character looks angry, defensive. Sometimes self-pitying. I'm saying that as a fan of conversation, not a critic. You want people to see you as human, but humans also take accountability. Where yours? The words hit harder than Joe expected. Harry's posture stiffened. Accountability, he repeated. You think I haven't taken it? I've owned every mistake I've made publicly, painfully. But I won't take accountability for other people's cruelty. That's not mine to carry. Joe didn't flinch. Maybe. But your family, Harry cut him off. Don't, he said, his voice low, controlled. The producer's eyes widened. Jamie mouthed a quiet, oh no. Joe blinked, caught off guard by the interruption. Don't what? Harry leaned forward. Don't turn this into another family drama. I've had enough of people pretending to care about healing when they just want gossip. This isn't that show. Joe sat back, folding his arms slowly. You came here knowing what I do, he said. You knew I ask questions people avoid, so why draw the line now? Because there's a difference between tough questions and disrespect, Harry said evenly. Ask about choices, about lessons, about truth, that's fair. But when you start dragging family back into the mud, it's not journalism, it's provocation. The room went completely still. Jamie muttered under his breath, and we've hit the line. Joe took a breath and tried to steady the tone. Look, I'm not here to provoke you, Harry. I'm trying to get to something real. But you have to admit, when people see you walk away from everything you were born into, it looks like rejection. Like betrayal. Don't you think they deserve some explanation? Harry's expression hardened. I've spent years explaining, he said. It's never enough. People don't want explanations, they want entertainment. They want the prince to play the part they've written for him. Joe nodded slowly, then said, and maybe you're just playing a new part now. That was the sentence that broke the air. Harry's face changed. The calm cracked just slightly, enough for the cameras to catch it. He didn't raise his voice, but there was something sharp behind the next words. You think this is a performance, he said quietly. You think losing my mother in front of the whole world, fighting to protect my wife from the same kind of hate, speaking up about trauma, was a show. Joe realized he had gone too far, but the moment had its own momentum now. I think everything in this era is a show, Joe said softly. Even honesty becomes a brand. Harry leaned closer, eyes narrowing. You can say that because it's not your life they've torn apart. It's easy to call something performance when you've never been forced to perform survival. The control room was silent. Jamie whispered, keep rolling, don't cut. Joe stayed quiet for a few seconds, letting the weight of Harry's words hang in the air. Then in a measured tone he said, so you're saying every interview you've done was survival? Yes, Harry said. And maybe that's what you don't get. Talking isn't the problem, being silenced is. The silence that followed was electric. You could feel it even through the broadcast stream. Then Joe spoke again. Maybe, but if speaking heals you, why does it look like it keeps hurting everyone else? The question hit like a hammer. Harry exhaled slowly, his voice tightening. Because healing isn't pretty, it's messy, it's misunderstood, but I'd rather live with the mess than the mask. Joe's tone softened, but the damage was done. I get that, he said, but there's a moment when truth becomes addiction. When you stop healing and start feeding on attention, how do you know the difference? Harry froze. For the first time since the show began, he didn't have an immediate answer. Joe didn't interrupt, he waited. When Harry finally spoke, his voice was quieter. Because attention fades, he said, peace doesn't, I know which one I'm chasing. Jamie looked at the timecode, 43 minutes into the segment. He mouthed to the floor manager, we've got fire. Joe leaned back, exhaling. You've got guts, Harry, I'll give you that. Most people would have walked out 20 minutes ago. Harry gave a dry half-smile. You underestimate how much walking out I've already done in my life. Laughter rippled faintly from the crew, but it didn't break the tension. Joe glanced at his notes. One question left. He knew it would sting, but the show demanded it. Final question before we wrap this up, Joe said. If your mother were alive today, Harry's head lifted sharply. The words froze him mid-breath. What do you think she'd say about all this? Joe finished. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Even the red on-air light felt too bright. The publicist went pale. Harry's voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. Don't do that, Joe frowned. Do what? Harry's eyes locked on his. Use her. Joe blinked. I wasn't, you were, Harry said. Everyone does. You ask me to talk about healing, and then you drag her memory into it because you know it'll break me open. That's not a question, that's bait. The silence that followed could have swallowed the entire building. Joe raised his hands slightly, palms out. All right, he said quietly. I hear you, but Harry wasn't done. His voice grew stronger now, controlled but shaking at the edges. You want to know what she'd say? Tell me to stop trying to prove myself to people who profit from my pain. Tell me to stop showing up to conversations like this, where decency gets traded for downloads. Joe looked down, guilt flickering across his face for a moment before professionalism returned. That wasn't my intention, he said softly. Maybe not, Harry said, but it's what happened. Jamie whispered through the control room mic, cut to wide shot, don't zoom in on him. Give him space. The camera slowly pulled back, showing the two men sitting opposite each other, two worlds colliding in a single frame. Joe cleared his throat. You've made your point, he said. I'll admit I probably crossed a line. Harry leaned back. His breathing was heavy but even. The problem, he said quietly, is everyone thinks the line only matters after they've crossed it. The sentence landed like a verdict. For a few seconds, no one spoke, then Joe looked toward the camera. We're going to take a short break, he said, his voice lower than before. We'll be right back. The red light went off. Inside the studio, silence flooded the room. Harry took off his headphones and set them gently on the table. His hand shook once before he steadied it. Joe leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The air between them wasn't angry anymore, it was thick with something else. Respect maybe, or regret. Hey, Joe said quietly, you handled that better than most people would have. Harry didn't look up. Most people don't have to, Joe nodded slowly. You're right. In the control room, Jamie turned to his assistant. That's going to be the clip, he said. That's the one people remember. But he was wrong. What people would remember wasn't the question, or the clash, or even the silence that followed. It would be the look on Harry's face when he realized what the world would do with that clip. He straightened his jacket, stood up slowly, and said quietly, let's finish it. Joe blinked. You want to keep going? Harry nodded. You asked for honesty, let's give them all of it. Jamie stared through the glass, half in awe, half in disbelief. He's not done, he whispered. As the countdown started again, Joe looked across the table at Harry. The prince's expression was composed now, almost serene. Joe said softly, for what it's worth, I didn't mean to humiliate you. Harry looked back at him and said, you didn't. He paused, eyes steady. You reminded me why I stopped trusting interviews. The red light flashed back on. The world would soon see what came next. The meltdown wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was quiet, a man unraveling just enough to show he was human, and a host realizing too late that humanity doesn't make good radio. The rest of the hour would burn across headlines, across screens, across every corner of social media. But in the studio, it wasn't fire. It was just two men sitting in silence, both realizing the same thing. The line between truth and entertainment had vanished, and neither of them would ever find it again. The red light came back on, but the energy in the studio didn't rise with it. It stayed low, settled, heavy. Like the room had absorbed what happened and was waiting to see how two men, one trained to confront, the other trained to endure, would carry the rest of the hour. Joe sat forward, elbows on the table, hands clasped. For the first time all interview, he didn't look like the dominant voice. He looked like someone who knew he'd touched something raw, something he hadn't meant to touch so sharply. Across from him, Prince Harry adjusted his mic with steady, deliberate hands. No tremor now, just precision. It was the kind of controlled movement that comes after a storm, not before one. The kind that belongs to someone who has been here before and learned how not to drown. "We're back," Joe said quietly, "and we're going to slow things down for the rest of the show." I think the last segment hit deeper than anyone expected. Harry didn't speak right away. He looked at Joe, then at the mic, then at his own reflection faintly mirrored in the glass wall ahead. For a moment, he looked like a man trying to decide which part of himself to show next, the composed public figure or the tired human being sitting under studio lights. He chose the human. "You asked me what my mother would think," he said softly, "and I reacted more sharply than maybe I should have." Joe shook his head. "I pushed you, I crossed the line, you had every right to push back." Harry gave a tiny nod, not of agreement but acknowledgement. "It's complicated," he said. "Talking about her always will be." The studio stayed quiet, even the crew didn't move. This wasn't the dramatic shouting match the title of the episode would later make it seem. It wasn't explosive or theatrical, it was something else, quietly devastating. Joe cleared his throat. "Let me ask something different," he said. "Not about royalty, not about family, about you." Harry sat straighter. He braced without letting it show. "You talk like a man trying to heal," Joe said. "But you also talk like someone who still carries a lot of pain. Do you ever worry that you've built a whole life around that pain? That it's become a kind of identity?" Harry breathed in through his nose, slow, measured. "Every day," he said. "Because when the world tells the same story about you long enough, you start to believe it. I spent years trying to escape the version of me everyone else wrote." He paused, eyes lowering. "Sometimes I still feel like I'm running from him." Joe didn't interrupt. "So yes," Harry continued. "There are days when the pain feels like the only thing people want from me, because it sells, because it trends, because it's easier than seeing me as a whole person." Joe leaned back, absorbing the honesty. "Do you think the public will ever see you that way, whole?" Harry shook his head slightly. "Not unless I give them something other than wounds." "And do you want to?" Joe asked. Harry hesitated. "Yes. But I don't always know how." The sentence hung heavy in the air, simple, vulnerable, unexpected. Jamie in the control room whispered, "That's the realest thing he's said all hour." But the conversation wasn't done turning. Joe laced his fingers together. "Let's talk about anger," he said. Harry looked up sharply, just a flicker. "Because people saw something in the last segment," Joe continued. "A crack, a flash. A moment when you stopped being the polished speaker and became, well, human." Harry's jaw tightened. He didn't deny it. "Does that scare you?" Joe asked. "What, being seen angry?" Joe said plainly. "Because the world doesn't give you permission to be angry, does it? Not without calling you unstable, dramatic, fragile." Harry's expression softened, not because he agreed, but because he recognized the truth in it. "It's dangerous for someone like me to get angry publicly," he said. "People hate it when a prince looks human." Joe chuckled under his breath. "People hate it when anyone looks human." Harry let out a quiet, humorless laugh. "That's sadly true." A beat of quiet followed. A shared understanding, rare, fragile, real. Joe leaned close to the mic. "You know, when you snapped earlier, it didn't look weak. It looked like someone who's tired." Harry looked down at the table. "I am tired." "Tired of what?" Harry took a long breath. Then he said, "Of having to defend being a person." Joe's eyes widened, not dramatically, but with genuine recognition. He had interviewed hundreds of people. Soldiers, fighters, actors, comedians, politicians. He knew real fatigue when he saw it, not the kind sleep fixes. The kind truth carries. Harry continued, voice low. People see me as either a villain or a victim. They never see the middle. And what's in the middle? Joe asked. A man, Harry said. A father, a husband, someone who's made mistakes, learned things, lost things, loved deeply, hurt deeply. He paused. Someone who's still figuring it out. Jamie whispered into the mic. This is gold, don't cut him off. Joe didn't. He let Harry breathe, he let the moment grow. So, Joe said gently, why come on my show? Of all places. Because your audience doesn't fake their reactions, Harry said. They don't pretend to like you out of politeness. They don't hide behind titles. He paused. I wanted one space where I didn't feel like I owed anyone a performance. And did you get that? Joe asked. Harry exhaled. I got the truth, he said. Even when it hurt, Joe nodded. That's fair. But as the conversation softened, the audience at home felt another tension rising, not between the two men, but around the question everyone was waiting for. Joe took a breath. Let me ask you something difficult, he said. Harry braced again. Joe spoke slowly, carefully. Do you regret walking away, leaving the crown behind, leaving your old life? Harry didn't flinch. No, he said, but I regret that I had to. Joe blinked. Explain that. I regret that the place I came from couldn't accept who I became. I regret that doing what was right for my family meant being called a traitor by people who don't know me. I regret that choosing peace meant living in chaos. The silence afterward was thick, heavy, real. Jamie mouthed, wow. Joe leaned back. And do you think you found peace now? Harry looked down at his hands. Not yet, he said. But I'm trying, Joe nodded slowly. Trying is more honest than claiming you found it. Harry met his eyes. Trying is the only real thing I can offer right now. Joe held his gaze. And that's enough. For the first time all hour, Harry's shoulders relaxed. Something in the room shifted from confrontation to something almost solemn. Then Joe said quietly, all right, final question. And I'll ask it the right way. Harry nodded once. What would your mother want for you now? Not what she would think, what she would want. Harry didn't look angry this time. He didn't tense. He didn't recoil. His face softened into something almost painful to witness. She would want me to be free, he said quietly. Not famous, not forgiven, free. Joe nodded. From what? Harry swallowed. From the weight of a life I didn't choose. The room went silent. A silence that didn't need words, that didn't need cameras, that didn't need anything. Joe let it breathe. Then he turned to the camera. We'll be right back to close out. The red light shut off. Harry pulled off his headphones and leaned back, eyes unfocused. He wasn't melting down, he wasn't exploding. He was unraveling, quietly, painfully, in a way the world rarely sees from men raised behind palace walls. Joe watched him for a moment. Hey, he said softly, you handled that better than most people ever would. Harry gave a small nod. I didn't come here to fight. I know, Joe said. But sometimes truth is a fight. Harry gave the smallest smile. Sometimes it's a war. A gentle knock on the glass signaled 10 seconds until the final outro. The publicist hovered near the corner, watching Harry closely. She knew what this interview would become: headlines, clips, analysis, judgment. But she also knew Harry hadn't lied, not once, and that mattered. The red light flashed again. Joe closed the show with a tone the audience wasn't used to hearing from him, measured, reflective. Tonight's conversation was raw, he said. Unexpected and real. Prince Harry opened up in ways few public figures ever do. Whether you agree with him or not, whether you understand his choices or not, he came here to speak honestly, and that deserves respect. Harry looked up, meeting the camera. His eyes weren't angry, they weren't broken, they were human. Joe continued, thank you for watching. This was not the conversation we expected, but it's one we'll all be talking about for a long time. The red light faded, the crew exhaled, Harry stood slowly, Joe stood with him. They shook hands, no cameras, no microphones, no audience. Just two men in a quiet room, both changed in ways they wouldn't fully understand until later. As Harry walked out of the studio, he didn't look back. He didn't pause. He didn't speak. Outside, the air felt cold, sharp, real. He took one deep breath and whispered to himself, free. No title, no crown, no script. Just a man walking into the night, finally allowed to feel everything he wasn't allowed to say. And that was the moment millions would mistake for a meltdown. But it was. It was release. It was the quiet collapse of a story the world had written for him, and the first breath of the story he was finally writing himself.